And I'm going to mute.
All right, so now I want to see if I can cast it now.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. I am pleased to welcome you to Women of Peace Corps' event, Peace Corps in Afghanistan, Then and Now. My name is Rachel Boyeda. I am the co-president of Women of Peace Corps Legacy, along with Jody Olson, and we are thrilled to welcome you tonight. We are a nonprofit community of returned volunteers, staff, and others affiliated with the Peace Corps who have a passion for promoting girls' and women's empowerment and community engagement. And we fulfill this mission through events, mentoring, service awards, and networking meetups. And I'm thrilled tonight to welcome Lee Lacey, who will be moderating tonight's event. Lee served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Samoa and held numerous staff positions at Peace Corps headquarters before serving as a Peace Corps director in Armenia. As that tour ended in 2010, Lee joined the Civil Surge in Afghanistan at the USAID Development Advisor to the Task Force Patriot on Forward Operating Base Shank, about 65 miles southeast of Kabul, monitoring USAID projects and collaborating with provincial reconstruction teams from Turkey, Czechoslovakia, and New Zealand in Logar, Bordak, and Bamiyan provinces. And with that, I'm pleased to welcome Lee.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everyone. I'm going to ask Shireen Tulik to be admitting folks and to thank her for all of the work she's done, as she is the producer of this program tonight and has done a lot of the background work to get us all started. So let me just give you a little bit about why Women of Peace Corps Legacy has partnered with Friends of Afghanistan and Peace Corps Community for Refugees for this event. We believe that because Peace Corps had a long legacy in Afghanistan prior to the assassination of Ambassador Dubs in 1979, it would be worth having some conversation about some of those events and what Peace Corps was doing in the country. But more recently, the RPCV community has been engaged in providing support to the Afghans who have come to the US after the evacuation of Afghanistan. Our hope for tonight is that as you hear about the experiences that some of us have had with Afghans coming to the US or having served in Afghanistan, that you will reach out to those organizations that are providing support to the Afghan people who've come to the US and provide monetary or service time with those groups. So what we're going to do tonight, I'm going to first introduce the 5 panelists that we have, and then I will call on each of them to speak, and I'll ask them some questions. And then at the end of that period of time, Shireen and I will open it up for questions, which you can put into the chat box, and which will be seen by both Shireen and by me. So that's how we're going to kind of operate for this evening. So let me just start by introducing the panel. First, we have Tony Agnello, who is the president of Friends of Afghanistan. Tony is also moderator for the Peace Corps Community for Refugees. He has had over 40 years of service as an educator and a coach. And we're really glad he's with us here to put us in touch with what that group of people are doing to support Afghan families who are here in the States. And secondly, we have Larry Bartlett, who is a career member of the Senior Executive Service. And Larry is the Director of Refugee Admissions in the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration in the U.S. Department of State. Larry was also an RPC from Yemen and served as country director in Bulgaria and Jordan. We also have Kathleen Corey, or also known as Corey, who's here. Corey is an RPCV from Liberia and a former Peace Corps director in Northern Macedonia and Sri Lanka. She's also a retired Foreign Service officer and formerly the president of Women of Peace Corps Legacy. We have with us also tonight Barbara Bush, our own Barbara Bush, who started as a civil servant when Peace Corps began. And Barbara wasn't subject to the 5-year rule. And so she stayed with Peace Corps for about 35 years, and she served in almost every single department in the agency. So when she walked out the door, everybody knew that the institutional knowledge was walking out with her. Since her retirement, she has been working with refugees, first with Syrians who have migrated to Greece. And that was the impetus for her to be one of the pushers for forming the Peace Corps community for refugees. And then we have Kathy Rulon, who has served in numerous leadership roles within Peace Corps, including serving as acting Peace Corps director and as chief of staff. Kathy has also had leadership positions with SEDPA and UNICEF. But one of the more important positions that she held in terms of our conversation tonight may be the one she held with the World Food Program, where she served to implement a program that was a school feeding program in Afghanistan. So this is the panel that you'll have available to you tonight. And we're going to start with Tony, who is now serving as the president of Friends of Afghanistan. And so, Tony, we'd like for you to share with us, if you would, what was it like? Where did you serve? How many projects were in Afghanistan at the time? Give us a little history about Peace Corps in Afghanistan. And before you start, I'm going to ask those people who are not speaking if you would be kind enough to mute your audio. All right, I'm turning it over to you, Tony.
First thing I want to do is not step too heavily on Barbara Bush's foot. I am a moderator for a committee of the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, and we meet regularly to discuss the issues related to the Afghan refugee crisis. Barbara is the coordinator and host of the organization itself, and she's ably assisted by a great host of characters that work well with her. I'm going to just jump in quickly and say that I served in Afghanistan from 72 to 75. Excuse me. And I was 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Samangan, which is a small northern provincial capital, and then 1 year subcontracted through the Department of State for the American International School, where I created and directed a youth center for a year. Now, if I'm going to follow the prompts, the next question will probably be about Afghan history, the history of Peace Corps in Afghanistan. Is that right?
That is correct, Tony. And I'm going to suggest to Shireen that we forego the slides and put us in gallery view so that we can see more of our participants. Great. Thank you, Shireen. Tony, go ahead, go right ahead.
So the early years, and I thank Will and Fran Irwin for the history of this. They did a really nice review of the early years of Peace Corps. And our first director was Bob Steiner, who got a command call from Sergeant Shriver. And Bob described himself as a Persian-speaking chicken farmer from Vermont. And I imagine he was the only one. And he came over, he did the investigation and established Peace Corps Year 1 in 1962. And we started out with 8 teachers. I'm sorry, we started out with 5 English teachers, 3 nurses, a mechanic, and every PCV was in Kabul. 4 years later, when Bob left, there were 200 volunteers in every Afghan province, and we were enormously welcome. We served in Afghanistan, and you mentioned it before, from 1962 up till a month after Spike Dubs was assassinated in Kabul. And we left in April of 1979, a few months before the Soviet invasion on Christmas Eve. Now, are you going to ask me a few more questions, or am I going to just do a narrative?
Yes, Tony. So what's some memory that you have of your time there that you'd be willing to share with us?
Well, let's see. I'm just trying to think how I can do it succinctly. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my project,
Okay.
which was a Teacher Corps Peace Corps program, especially designed and requested by the Education Ministry of Afghanistan, run in coordination with Buffalo State College, which is a part of the SUNY system, the State University of New York. And our program was designed to, in a culturally appropriate way, change the educational system of Afghanistan, update it, and upgrade it. And my counterparts and I were science supervisors, and we were responsible for implementing hands-on experimental laboratory programs to supplement the traditional rote memorization system that's still pretty prevalent in South Asia. I do want to claim a little bit of success, because when I returned to my duty site in Samangan in 2006, on a trip to oversee a student-funded school construction project where we built 6 schools for Afghan girls. I was taken on a tour of the high school where they were still using some of the science experiments that I had introduced in the early 70s. So that's a quick background on me, and our other groups were virtually every technological and educational program that you can imagine we were involved in over those 17 years.
Well, and what were some of the challenges, Tony, that you and other volunteers faced when you were serving in the early 70s?
This was an issue of modest contention. We had some of our volunteers, a good number of them, because of the population dynamics, were in Kabul. And we would sometimes refer to our urban colleagues as experiencing Peace Corps light. They had regular European type plumbing. They had access to a lot of urban type shopping opportunities. And for those of us who were provincial volunteers, I'll give you my example. My house had no running water, but the outhouse was very judiciously placed in the far corner of the compound. There was a chicken coop that served as a woodshed behind the house, and the 3-room central house had an attached hammam. We turned the attached washroom into a kitchen, and most of the PCV's rural homes were heated by wood-burning sheet metal fireplaces called bujaris, and they were made by local tinsmiths. And my mud and straw brick Flintstone-like house, so I know you're getting a picture, was the last private residence on my street, the last private residence in my town, and my street was the last street on the power grid. And we had pretty good electricity for 4 hours a night that supplemented the ever-present kerosene lanterns. So what was my experience like? I was very well respected as a teacher in the community among the incredibly hospitable Afghan, within the Afghan culture. And so if we were to travel, we would walk, take bicycles, or find a gaudi. And the gaudis, if you can visualize it, is a single horse, two-wheeled chariot that would take us all over the town itself. And if we wanted to go to another community, we would take a taxi or through intercity bus travel.
Great. So Tony, I've heard about, and I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, I apologize, but I've heard about a group of women who were called the vaccinators. Do you have any information about that group of volunteers?
I'm a Rotarian, and I've been working with some Rotary groups, and I always bring up our vaccinators, and I know I saw a few of them on the list here. And certainly we can pick them out for questioning later. But I tell folks, we had a group of all female Peace Corps volunteers who went out and assisted the Afghan Ministry of Medicine and went into the tribal areas where, interestingly enough, there was vaccine resistance. And I tell my Rotarian friends, this group eliminated smallpox in Afghanistan, where it was in its last outpost on Earth, essentially eradicating the disease from the planet. And the place where polio is hanging on, except for this brief pop-up in Malawi again, the place where polio is hanging on is the exact same place. And I'll bet you a couple of our RPCV vaccinator friends would be more than happy to have Rotary and Bill Gates introduce them to that region again so they could reconnect with some of their old contacts. It is a sad commentary that that same mindset is preventing the eradication of polio today.
Thank you, Tony. And I see Jill Vickers here, who I know was part of that. She indicated that there were two groups. And Jill, when we come to the questioning, I hope you'll join in and share with us more about, I think there is a video that captures some of that once we finish the panel discussions, if you will, if you'll join us
Jan
then.
and Rita are here too.
Oh, great, great.
And let me say to my RPCV colleagues, Khush Amadi, and I am very happy that you all are here.
All right, so we're going to move on from the then and more to the now. And Larry Bartlett is going to update us on what it's been like for him and for the staff that he's worked with and the large number of volunteers across the country that they have engaged to be supportive of the Afghans who came to the U.S. after the evacuation. So Larry, I'll start with one question, Larry. I know that the formal speak is, we call them our Afghan guests rather than refugees. Would you mind explaining why they're not identified as refugees at this point?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate being able to talk about the program and enlist more people. I know many of you have been involved in the effort and really look forward to more involvement over time. I'm going to give a little bit of a long-winded reply to that, but I think it sets the scene. When the evacuation began in August, 2021. In fact, we were already bringing Afghans out prior to the fall of Kabul. But when Kabul fell, of course, the evacuation became frenetic and, with many, many planes a day. And in terms of trying to respond to bringing people to the US, as we looked across the administration at the various tools available to us, the refugee program, which I'm very involved in, which we consider to be the gold standard because it actually has many, many benefits that come with it, could frankly not fully be utilized. The speed of the evacuation, the number of flights out of Kabul, mostly into Qatar, but not only into Qatar, and then the need to get people on to the US, frankly, surpassed the ability of the refugee program to process people. So the Department of Homeland Security decided to utilize their authority to bring people in as parolees. And so because of that, there was a very quick kind of movement from all of the overseas locations, Germany, Italy, Spain, but again, mostly Qatar, to the US. But because people came in as parolees, they weren't refugees and they weren't available or eligible for refugee benefits. And secondly, they needed to have continued processing, which is why the US military was asked and agreed to put people up on, as the numbers expanded, on what eventually became 8 military bases. So people came in as parolees. The administration, parole has other connotations in the United States within our judicial system. So instead of calling them parolees, a descriptor of guest was made, which I thought was very, very appropriate. But despite the fact that people came in as parolees, there was an ability for Congress to help the administration provide many of the same benefits to the parolees. Although one thing I will highlight, and just for people who don't know this territory, the benefit that actually was not provided was kind of an early ability to adjust their immigration status. And it's one of the things that was, frankly, an unfortunate consequence of the speed that people came in as parolees. They now must adjust their status on their own through our immigration process, which means the vast majority of them will need to apply for asylum and then go through the asylum process, which could take a lot of time. On the front end, people are getting the benefits they need, I think, to be successful in the short term, but they still need to adjust their immigration status. Back to you, Lee.
All right, thank you. So Larry, just generally, what is the mandate of your office, and more specifically, what kinds of responsibilities have you had for these Afghans who are coming to the US? What are the numbers like?
Yeah, I just want to go sit down now when answering this question. The mandate of my office, frankly, is to bring 125,000 refugees from throughout the world to the US this year. It's not a number we're going to achieve. I think people are probably pretty familiar with the last administration and their views towards refugees. So we are still very much in a rebuilding mode. But my office actually is, on the Department of State side, responsible for the worldwide program and bringing refugees, frankly, from we have over 72 countries from which we bring refugees, or 72 nationalities. So we're now involved in Ukraine. Of course, we're involved in Afghanistan, Syrians, Iraq. I mean, you name the refugee population, we're involved in it. We don't do it alone. We do it with DHS. We do it with HHS, who has the responsibility for long-term support once people arrive. But we're kind of the belly button for everything that happens overseas, all of our diplomatic relationships, all of our relationships with the UN, to really identify and process refugees. On the Afghan side, even though people didn't come in as refugees, my office was tapped to be responsible for much of the work that was done for this cohort, frankly, because we had the experience and we knew how to do it. So we put people, frankly, overseas. We had a number of people deployed to Qatar and across the other bases, Germany, Spain, and Italy. We also put people out at the U.S. military bases. And I will tell you, we actually put Kathleen Corey out. And I'm going to take some responsibility and pleasure in identifying people who could go out and be part of the U.S. effort. So the State Department put cohorts out at each of the military bases because we were able to understand, number one, kind of what services were needed at the bases themselves, but also to be able to link them to U.S. communities to which we then resettled them. So the U.S. government and other countries evacuated over 100,000 Afghans in the course of about 2 months. That was August, September. But then of that, about 75,000 came to the U.S. rather directly. And we placed those people into U.S. communities over the course of about 6 months, which is probably the fastest we've ever done it in history, in history period. And so a program that's existed since 1980, we put 75,000 people into U.S. communities, 72,000 with full support. And there's a little bit of a delta there of 3,000 who decided to move into communities on their own. But I have to tell you, I have nothing but appreciation with not only for my own staff, but all the other volunteers from across the U.S. government and the NGO sector and the communities themselves, frankly, that helped make this possible and frankly successful. I will tell you, it is not perfect. If you are working already with Afghan refugees, you will know that, number one, they came with a lot of trauma already. And I think the way we brought them in, although it was probably the most humane way possible, is still a bit of a anomaly. We don't normally do things as quickly and as kind of in such an emergency mode. But I will tell you that I think so far what we're seeing is that people have been very, very successful, which speaks to the resilience of refugees themselves, not just Afghans, but any refugee, the resilience that they bring to this effort. And I think frankly, the contributions they bring to a community are just amazing. So back to you, Lee.
Larry, what would you say to this group of people who are potential supporters? How should we be supporting this initiative?
First of all, I would correct you. I don't think potential is the right word to use. I think supporters would be the right way to characterize it. And I say that with a smile, but obviously the Peace Corps community is, this is their bread and butter. This is, I think, the DNA of people who are on this call. Well, first of all, and I did send something in, so hopefully it'll be shared, but there's a couple different ways, I think, to directly contribute. And one is to work locally with a resettlement agency. And there's over 300 sites that Afghans have been placed into. I will tell you, some of those sites are in the same city, so it's not 300 cities. But there are over 300 organizations that are directly working with our Afghan guests who've arrived. The Afghan guests need direct support. The agencies, frankly, are overwhelmed. We provided a number of mechanisms to help the agencies hire more staff, find more housing, but it's a work in progress. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to be involved locally. I will tell you that managing volunteers is, for those of you who've been Peace Corps staff, I will tell you managing volunteers is actually work. It doesn't come with no responsibility. So if you try with a local agency and you somehow feel neglected, I would say look for other avenues. I think material contributions, I'm sure money is always appreciated. I think other contributions are probably fine, but to me, I think the opportunity over time to become involved in kind of direct relationships with Afghan families who are basically adapting, I know from people's personal experiences, is probably the most kind of personal way that people can be involved and rewarded. And it's a bit of an art, I think, helping people adjust without helping them adjust while becoming independent, right? Which is really the goal, that people become independent. But I know that some of the relationships that people have made are lifelong. And it really is, I don't know what it is, the third goal, I guess, of Peace Corps, which I think there's no better way to do that. I mean, you can be involved in more national effort, but I think it's all over the place. And, I've sent a link to the 9 resettlement agencies that are responsible for most of the 72,000 that we placed. And then also there's an organization called Welcome.us, which is also kind of a large kind of repository of opportunities for people to become involved.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. More to come about how to get involved. I'm going to turn to Corey at this point. So Corey, in the last, 8 weeks of 21, was because of her retired FSO status, was able to get very engaged in working with 4 military bases to stand up an ESL and a cultural orientation program for the Afghans. So Corey, welcome to this conversation. Tell us a little bit about what those 8 weeks were like for you.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Lee. And just a shout out. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. Thank you so much for caring about this topic and for coming tonight. It means a lot to all of us. Well, thanks to Larry Bartlett, I was honored to be able to be part of an interagency team to develop this cross-cultural curriculum, working with a lot of the videos and text that a group that Larry hired named CORE had already produced, and we were able to use those as we created what we needed for exactly for the bases. So it was basically, we had wonderful videotapes in both Pashto and Dari, our 2 linguistic groups, with resettled Afghans, people who had been here for a while, giving advice to the potential newcomers. Telling them how things are different in Afghanistan from the United States, and then little words of advice in there. So things like, and I'll just give you a couple examples because it's sort of fun to have heard them talk about these things in terms of things like housing, how important having a lease is and what your responsibility to that is. Under rights and responsibilities, US law and immigration law and your status, as well as things like if you get stopped by the police and you don't speak English, this is something you need to do and pay attention to. Things like cost of living. A lot of our refugees wanted to go to Sacramento and Northern Virginia because there's big Afghan communities there, but the cost of living in both of those places and how hard it is to find work was really tough. So we were working with the groups of cities, 30 cities around the United States who were providing videos welcoming the Afghans and telling them how much they were wanted and showing them all the kinds of great things they would get if they went to Kansas, for example. Some of the bases divided the classes between women and men because they felt like the women would speak up more and have more pertinent questions if they were just with other women. And so some did that, not all of them did. I worked on 4 bases, but we tried to service all 8. So back to you.
Thank you, Corey. So, I've known you for a long time, so I happen to know that you, before your State Department experience and even before your Peace Corps staff experience, you spent a lot of time assisting Vietnamese refugees. How would you compare their experience with the experience of the Afghans that you've already served?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yes, and a number of the people on this call I worked with in the 1980s, whereby we were servicing Lao, Cambodian, and Vietnamese refugees after the Vietnam War. I went out to work with refugees for 1 year, and I stayed 9. Just because it was such satisfying work. It was really very interesting. All the refugees who had been accepted for resettlement in the United States between the ages of 5 and 55 had to mandatorily take a 6-month course of cultural orientation and English as a second language as a way to prepare for their new life coming up. And the resettlement agencies had tons of time to get everything ready for them. And so at that time, they had an opportunity to, really get ready emotionally and psychologically about the move. And there was a lot of joy. You always felt a lot of joy in the camp, which is one of the reasons I wanted to stay so long. This experience, as Larry described beautifully, was just very, very different. You had so many Afghans coming overnight into these military bases. God bless the military for how they set everything up, creating small towns for our guests, really quite beautifully, did just an amazing job. And then each of the numerous organizations that were in the camps, I keep calling them camps, on the bases with us, as time went on, found that they had classes and suggestions for topics that the refugees could find useful and important. There was no program set up per se, because the belief was the Afghans would come, they'd be on the military bases for a small period of time and then move quickly to resettlement. That didn't happen in everybody's case. And the longer people stayed, the more different groups of people provided activities and classes for the refugees. And so our cultural orientation class was one of those, not mandatory by any means, but very successful. Successful to the point, frankly, that there were a number of high-level US government officials, and definitely the leaders of the Pashto and Dari groups felt very strongly that this course should be mandatory because there was so much good information in it.
So Corey, I know you've written recently in the Foreign Service Journal about the impact that this work has had on you. Would you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I was really delighted to write that article. It helped me to process, frankly, Lee and everybody, what I and all of us who worked on the basis, what we went through. Excuse me just a sec. I would say this was probably one of the most, if not the most profound experience that I had. And I've had a lot of experiences working with refugees, of course. But this was so different. It was just so completely different. With social media, cell phones, TV interviews, as Larry mentioned, the Afghan, and being moved so quickly, the Afghans who ended up on the military bases had a hand back to Afghanistan. So they knew exactly what was going on back home. They knew what was happening to their relatives and friends and people they worked with. They were very aware. So they came with an enormous amount of stress and anxiety. That was a big part of who they were. And so they frequently would stop us and say, can you help me? Or let me tell you my story. And as a teacher, I had people frequently come up after class and say, okay, I'll give you a couple of examples. One veiled burqa, veiled woman, only thing I could see was her tearing eyes, and an interpreter she brought. And the interpreter said she wants to show you a photograph. And on her cell phone was the picture of her mother, father, and brother badly beaten in coffins, and asked if I could help find her sister, because her sister was in hiding, having not been at the home the night the Taliban came. That was one. And then right after her came this very lovely older man, and he showed me this. He goes, I got to show you my picture, got to show you my picture in English. This is my niece. This is my niece. Isn't she beautiful? And I said, yeah, where is she? Well, she was killed during the time of the suicide bomber, when people were waiting to evacuate. And there were more horrific stories than what I just told you. All of us got very deeply emotionally involved with the Afghans on our bases, because we learned so much about what they had been through and their hopes and dreams for the future, but they still had this awareness of that Afghanistan was not in very good shape.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you.
And I just real quickly, Lee, mention a couple of the programs. I'll be real fast. I know you're doing a great job of keeping time, but let me just very quickly. There was so many different programs of everyone. I can't even tell you how many English classes. There was cricket and volleyball and chess, and for the men and for the women, there were all kinds of activities that different people put on, sewing and knitting, and one of my absolute favorite things was the military would do is play Afghan music as loud as possible, and you'd get 700 men separate from women, 2 different nights, and seeing women in burqas standing up on desks dancing their hearts out is something I will never ever forget. Nor will I forget the children who came running up to you and what you name, you got chocolate, you have chocolate, and would follow you everywhere you went with just big smiles on their face and lots of love in their heart for about what they were going to endure. So thank you, Lee, for the extra 30 seconds. I'm done.
All right, thank you, thank you. So Barbara Bush, so tell us about Peace Corps community for refugees. How did that get started? What's been your experience with that? Barbara.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. Well, Lee, we got started because back in 2016, there was, you may remember, what amounted to a tsunami of Syrian refugees pouring out of Turkey across the straits into the Greek island of Lesbos. And we had some Peace Corps friends who were there at the time, several of us did, who were trying to do something to mitigate the suffering of these people as they were arriving, and calling on us back here to send money if we could and come and volunteer if we could. So some of us did both. And my sister and I and others arrived there and tried to do what we could and to help. And we discovered something that I get teared up about, which is that there were all these young people who had come from all over the world. They'd come from Singapore, Palestine, Canada, Australia, all the Pacific Islands, all the European countries, the United States. And there they were just working their hearts out, really practically 24 hours a day. And they were figuring out ways to help these people and to get things a little bit organized. And us Peace Corps alums said, this must be the way the Peace Corps was in the early days, in the early 60s. And then we said, hey, returning Peace Corps volunteers would be absolutely wonderful in these kinds of situations. And I say this with a deep, honest respect for volunteers, because I never was one. I was asked many times, where were you a volunteer? But anyway, I wasn't there. I was with my paperwork. But anyhow, we thought volunteers, RPCVs would be perfect for this, because you're very comfortable with people from other countries. You know what it's like to acculturate because you did it yourselves, all of you with your assignments. And the other thing is, you're all used to a climate of, shall we say, ambiguity, coping with things that are really not what you'd call terribly well organized. And so we said, well, let's see if we can't get people, let them know about this and see if they would be interested in helping. So we went to the NPCA and they gave us their support. And of course, it being the Peace Corps, we had a small group meeting to try to decide what to do. And of course, also very Peace Corps-y. Okay, let's form a committee. So we formed a committee and I forgot to duck. So then they looked around the room and said, okay, well, why don't you get this organized? So that's how we got started. And we put out the word to volunteers. When we established 3 goals, I should emphasize that we have to have 3 goals, right? So our first goal was find ways to connect return Peace Corps volunteers with supporting refugees overseas, with supporting refugees getting resettled in the United States, and with supporting refugees in the public square. Because as Larry mentioned earlier, it really wasn't it was pretty chilly in terms of the national view of arriving refugees and immigrants in 2016. So that's what we decided to do, and we launched our group. And I'm very proud to say that farmer volunteers, God bless them all, have responded just beautifully. And what we forecast actually turned out to be right. And Corey and would know this much better in person, and Kathy Rulon too. All the things we thought would be good, serve well in these settings turned out to be true. My favorite story is about one of the participants at Quantico, who I asked her how her experience was, and she said, "Oh, I loved every minute of it." She said, "It reminded me exactly of being a volunteer. I felt so nostalgic." She said, "Everything was a big mess. I just loved it." And so we thought, see, and I remember one of the military guys being quoted as saying, "Gee, these farmer volunteers, they're so calm. They don't get all excited about all this stuff." Because of course, no, this is something people are very familiar with. So I'm just, still to this day, I'm just so grateful for everybody and so admiring of farmer volunteers. And anybody who's on this call who'd like to join us, you would be so welcome. And maybe we can talk about specific opportunities later. But that's the story, Lee.
So Barbara, so what are some of the activities that this group is providing to the Afghan refugees?
Well, it's similar to what Larry has already described. In other words, our membership around the country, we have members all over the country, are working closely with resettlement agencies in each of he said 300 and some different localities. I don't know if we have enough, if we have over 300 places, but that's one of the main things they're doing. And what you do working with resettlement agencies is you help get people, the kids in school, enrolled in school, you help them with their doctors and dentist appointments. You help them, you give them some TEFL lessons if you can, and you take them shopping, all those kinds of things to make them feel at home and more comfortable. A lot of people invite them to their houses for Thanksgiving dinner and things like that. There's rather simple things, but just to make people feel at home.
And there's certain organizations that your group is partnering with. Is that correct, Barbara? Would you name?
Well, that's true. That's true. As we said about getting this organized, Lee, we use the old Peace Corps recruiting thing about supply and demand. The first thing we were doing was looking at where is the demand, and we, of course, Lesbos in Greece was one of the places we knew that they had NGOs who needed volunteers. So we found out more about that. Kathy can tell us more about that. So, and then our overseas work was curtailed because of COVID, sadly. But anyway, in the US, we've worked with we learned about the resettlement agencies. Most of us, certainly including me, didn't know much about that and how it worked. But we began to connect with local resettlement agencies and find out how we could provide. We didn't want to start any programs of our own. There were already those available. And that's why we formed as many partnerships as we could. And we're still trying to do that. And then one of the best things that happened to us was having a chance to work with the Friends of Afghanistan and do help them out in any way that they requested. And the dedication of those people to this day still gets me. They are utter devotion to the country and to its people is just very inspiring. So that's one. And we hope that we'll be able to help Friends of Ukraine. They're next up in terms of all the things that they're going to have to try to do. So we want to try to help them if we can. Our members help them if we can. And there are other examples, and that's in terms of demand. In terms of supply and how we might help people, we've been using NPCA's list. We've been working closely with a lot of the affiliate groups of NPCA around the country, which are just terrific. And in getting to use their Facebook pages to interest people in working locally and so forth. And as I say, friends of groups. And we're going to try to do more now along the border because friends of El Salvador, Afghanistan, Nicaragua and so on. Because I think, and Larry can verify this, but I think now we're going to have another wave of immigration over the border with this remain in Mexico policy abrogated. So I think, so we're going to try to find more partners that way. And also one other thing, and we owe this to Tony Agnello also and his gang, we think that there's a really big potential partnership with Rotary clubs all around the country, because they're all very big in their local communities. They have lots of contacts. And if we can enlist them in this kind of work, we think in each one of the local, it'll be a dynamite partnership. So those are the kinds of things we keep trying to develop. I think Larry has said before, there are two things that these refugees especially need: English and housing. And we're trying to set up, I'm really proud of this, we're trying to set up a corps of TEFL teachers. And heavens knows the Peace Corps has a lot of those. And we have a wonderful woman who retired as the head of the ESL program at Rutgers by the name of Nanette Bouvier. And I hope that Nanette may actually be on this call and may have some comments later. But that's one of the things we think we can do. And let's try to enlist some of our veteran TEFL teachers. And so that's, that's the sort of thing we need.
Hey, Lee, I want to jump in just a minute. So a couple other organizations I want to mention, not to get in front of Rotary, but Lions Club International is also becoming very involved. And also an organization called Islamic Relief, which is kind of the first organization, Muslim organization in the US that's really become involved. And so I'd also give a shout out to those places for people to look at for volunteering. Back to you, sorry.
Hey, Larry, say that again. Lions what?
Lions Club International, as well as Islamic Relief.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll put these on our website along with the 9 relief agencies that are part of the support system that has been set up through Larry's office.
Lee, may I ask? Oh, sorry. May I add one other thing? Housing. Housing is a big problem, and I'm hopeful that somehow and another we can connect with Habitat for Humanity, which has a lot of local autonomy, and see if somehow we can enlist them. That's something we know very little about. And if anybody in the, well, I'm sorry, we do. We have one member who knows a lot about it. And, but if others in the audience can help us in that respect and have any thoughts, I think that would be very good, helpful.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. And we're going to turn to Kathy to bring us to the end of this. Kathy. So you've been instrumental in setting this whole group up. What are some other ways that we can get this group of people that have been interested enough to join us this evening to get them more involved?
Well, before I get into to that, Lee, I'd like to thank you and also Women of Peace Corps Legacy for hosting this discussion.
Yeah.
As we've said, we have a lot of work to do, and if anyone on this call, the Zoom call, is interested in joining us, we'd love to have them. I'd also like to tell you a little bit more about the projects that we have, particularly the one in Greece, as we are currently looking into the possibility of opening up opportunities in Greece as well. So the work I did in Lesbos, I'll give you a little bit of context first. The Greek island of Lesbos is one of the closest islands to Turkey, and it has a population of about 85,000 people. And over the course of 2015, the island hosted more than 500,000 refugees. Wow. So you can imagine, it was unbelievable. The boats filled with refugees from Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq began arriving in September of 2015. At that time, about 80% of the refugees were Afghans. And I'd worked, as you mentioned, in Afghanistan after 9/11, right after 9/11, in fact, and had been deeply moved and inspired by the Afghan people's resilience, as Larry mentioned, their courage and their perseverance. Some of the stories they told about the travels that they had made, the way that they had come from their countries was absolutely unbelievable. And yet here they were. I was also touched by the local Greek population that provided food, water, and shelter during the height of the migration, all the while watching their tourist industry dwindle and their businesses, specifically hotels and restaurants, go empty. And yet they continued to run their restaurants, but for the refugees. I began working on the development of our first overseas project in 2018. And before arriving on the island, I researched the international and local NGOs working with refugees and set up appointments with about, maybe 20 of them. At this time, there were still migrants arriving on the shores and nearly 8,000 people living in the largest camp, which was built to accommodate only 20 people. So you can imagine what the conditions were like. They were very, very poor. And the problem was that the Greek government was not processing asylum requests as quickly as they needed to. So many of these occupants had been in the camps for months, and some as long as several years. So after visiting with the NGO directors and the staff members, I selected NGOs that were doing excellent work and had appropriate volunteer assignments for RPCVs. 10 of the RPCVs responded to our announcements about the positions. And one of them, Hector, an RPCV in Peru, volunteered to work with Lighthouse Relief, an NGO that specializes in search, rescue, and land operations. And I'd really like to read you a paragraph from a report he wrote after being on the island for 3 months. I think it gives you an insight into some of the work the volunteers did and some of the volunteers. So Hector says, "We did rescues all times of the day and night. After 3 weeks of daytime spotting shifts, where I was paired with another volunteer and using telescopes and binoculars to spot the boats headed towards Lesbos, I became a team leader. My team consisted of 3 volunteers. We used night vision to do overnight spotting at Cape Caracas, the most dangerous point in the northern part of the island, where many refugees had already drowned. The Caracas shift is covered between 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. One volunteer spots alone for 30 minutes, while the other 2 volunteers sleep in a hut for intervals of 60 minutes. This was one of my favorite shifts," says Hector, "as the night sky was beautiful." So he was dealing with these issues, but still just amazed at nature and the night sky. It's really a lovely report. And we have it on our website if any of you would like to read the entire report. Just do a search for Hector and you'll find the report. The other types of work that the volunteers did ranged from grant writing to driving refugees to medical appointments or to dental appointments or from one place to another. They also provided daycare to children and English lessons to adults. They organized clothing and food distributions. One of them developed a website and provided translation and assisted with whatever was needed at any given moment. They were really praised by their NGO leaders and were asked to stay beyond the time they had committed to. In fact, several of them did. And as I mentioned initially, we are looking at the possibility of setting up new opportunities for volunteers in Greece because there's only 2,000 refugees left on the island of Lesbos, and the majority of the Afghans have already left. But a report from the Greek City Times states that nearly 10,000 Ukrainian refugees have come to Greece since the start of the Russian invasion on February 24th. So we're looking to hopefully be able to support that group of refugees as well.
So Kathy, what is your website?
PCC, the number 4, refugees.org.
Okay. So there've been some requests in chat. Let me just speak to those. For, you know, a one pager with all of these, with all of this information.
Mhm.
And yes, we can put that together, but I have to check with my colleague Shireen and to find out if we can get this out to people through their email addresses as they registered for the Zoom.
Okay, great. That'd be great.
Shireen, is that possible? Do we have everyone's email address?
We should be able to do that. I also put something into the chat for everyone. I put a PDF into the chat. You should be able to download. Otherwise, we'll definitely make sure that we get that information for you. We can also put it up on the screen at the end of the chat, at the end of this session.
So we will get the websites for all 3 of our organizations sponsoring this event, plus the 9 agencies, plus these recommendations that have come through this conversation. And I noticed that Elizabeth suggested checking with your literacy council, who may also be able to let you know whether or not they're doing any ESL classes or language classes for refugees. Thank you.
Lee, is there time for me to talk a little bit about the work we did at the base, Quantico?
Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit more specifics about the work that Peace Corps Community for Refugees did at the Marine base at Quantico. Thanks to Corey for engaging us in this activity. It was really an overwhelming task, but a very rewarding one. And I think that the volunteers who were engaged in this activity felt the same way. Peace Corps Community for Refugees recruited volunteers for both the cultural orientation and the English language training programs, as well as a children's program that ran at the same time that the classes were taking place. So they had someone to take care of their children. Our communications team reached out to our network members and supporters with information about these volunteer opportunities. And we also worked through the affiliate groups in the DC region to identify teachers for the program. We found about 20 volunteers who were willing not only to give their time to teach, but to drive to Quantico and back, some of them driving at the very least an hour there and an hour back. And they were just incredibly dedicated volunteers. Majority of them were RPCVs, but we also had several military spouses who joined the team. In addition to the recruitment of volunteers, volunteer teachers, we identified an ESL expert to lead and support the English language program. And Barbara's already told you about Nanette. She was super. She developed the lesson plans for each class, and then every night she held a Zoom meeting with the teachers to walk through the day's activities, deal with any issues or problems that they had, and then walk them through the lesson plans for the next day. We faced daily challenges at the base because it was put together so quickly. You know, the problems ranged from lack of equipment, oftentimes almost every day, to lack of classroom space. And since the Marines had had no time to plan for the arrival of these large numbers of refugees, it was a challenge for them and for us. but we had Maggie Thielen on our team, an RPCV from Thailand. And she was on the ground. She was our on the ground hero in dealing with these issues. She had a direct line to Lieutenant Colonel McAvoy, who was our lead contact at the base, and was able to report the problems and get them dealt with very quickly. The teachers were incredibly resourceful when dealing with all of the challenges. They kind of shrugged their shoulders and carried on when they had no equipment, or took their Afghan students outside under a tree when there were no classrooms. And despite the challenges, many of them, well, all of them really, spoke of the joy they felt interacting with and providing classes for the Afghans. I know some of these volunteers are in the audience tonight, and I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank them again for their incredible work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. Yes, I see Nanette here, and I
Yeah.
know that Maggie Thielen was also very much engaged. Thank you very much for your service. Jill Vickers has asked a question. Jill, would you just unmute and ask your question to the group?
Thank you. Yeah, so my Afghan friend is a junior at Guilford College in Greensboro, and there's an organization called Every Campus of Refuge, and she was through some Quaker student leadership group, she found out that they were looking for volunteers. She's the only Afghan on campus. So she got involved immediately in February and tells me what this has meant to her, her family is all still back in Afghanistan, unable to get out, to be able to help Afghans that have gotten out. And she said, you know, they need so much emotional support, as well as spoke of how easy it is for her to understand what they're facing, because when she's been through the experience as a young woman coming here on her own as a student in high school. So my question is anyone doing an organized effort to try to find other, Pashto and Dari speakers, Afghan students here for high school or college, to get involved in ways that they can as translators and, help bridge the gap between volunteers who have never been to Afghanistan, really don't know, want to help, and to help them, understand ways in which they can help.
Thank you, Jill. I'm going to turn to Kathy or Barbara for a response to that.
Lee, Tony is very good on this. Tony.
All right, Tony, do you have a suggestion?
My fallback suggestion, and the one that actually just about at the start of the Peace Corps Community for Refugees at one of the conferences, I discussed with some of the early officers and founders of the organization. Barbara wasn't there, she reminded me. But my fallback answer is get in touch with your local resettlement agency. That's the easy one. And then certainly start individual initiatives with volunteer agencies and civic groups in town. Faith-based initiatives, like Larry said before, some of the service clubs, they are frequently willing to lend a hand and sometimes lend resources to this effort.
So Tony, I will just ask, so does Friends of Afghanistan keep a list of Afghans who are residing in the US?
We don't have a comprehensive list, but our members are in touch with Afghan citizens in their localities. But, that's a great idea, developing a comprehensive list of where the Afghan citizens are. I also recommend all the time and regularly at our Peace Corps Community for Refugees FOA meetings, that we reach out to local Afghan organizations. There are some great ones in the Bay Area of San Francisco, New York City, DC, some great Afghan organizations. And if you want to find a motivated group, find people who share a culture and a language with people who are in difficult times, and they will step up.
Okay, thank you. And Larry, you have your hand up. Do you have some suggestions? Larry, you're muted.
Excellent. Every Camp is a Refuge is an interesting organization. I will tell you there are a number of institutes, mostly of higher education, that are involved in helping Afghans. A number of them are providing full scholarships. Bard College in New York is one that's I visited, doing incredible work. So I would also, reach out to local community colleges and universities. The other place I think that was developed to be a one-stop shop clearinghouse is welcome.us. And so I would invite you to go onto their website. You should be able to find a wealth of information on welcome.us as a way to plug in at a community level to helping Afghans.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So Brian has a question. Is there a database of geographically where there is a need? RPCV's Afghanistan 74 to 1977 live in northern Michigan and are not aware of nearby needs. Larry, is that something?
Lee, I'm going to take that one. So I did send out a one-pager prior to this call, and hopefully it'll be disseminated to people. There, on that one-pager, first of all, welcome.us, once again, is one of the links. But the other is, and if you go onto the State Department website, you can also find this information. Go to PRM, the Population Refugee Migration Bureau. There is a list of the 9 resettlement agencies, national agencies, and all of their over 300 sites. So I have to tell you, I'm not sure in northern Michigan what we have, but in many places.
Okay. And Kathy has something to add to that.
Yes, you can also go on to the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. And if you click on the map, the United States map, you click on your state, it gives you a list of the NGOs that are doing resettlement assistance. And so you can find the names of the organizations that are in your area, possibly not in your specific area, but in your state. And I think from there you can get the kinds of information that you're interested in.
Thank you for that, Kathy. And I just want to repeat, it's Afghan Placement Assistance
and Assistance Program.
And assistance, and that's within the Department of State?
I just Googled Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. Yeah, I think it might be in DOS.
Yeah, so APA, so that was set up by State Department and HHS.
Yes.
And so it's the same resettlement partners that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Other questions? Shireen, do you have some questions?
Yes, we do. We have a question that asks, where are the majority of Afghans resettling?
Okay, Lee, I'm going to jump in. Sorry.
Good. That's why you're here.
There's some places that we call, and a few of us will smile when we talk about this. Corey, I know won't be one of them. Highly impacted sites. And believe me, if you live in one of these places, you are needed. So Sacramento, California, perhaps the largest population of Afghans in the US, and it is a huge magnet for people to join. Northern Virginia, similar. Austin, Texas. Seems like there's one more, Corey, that I'm missing, but we basically, I will tell you, there's a couple of things that just maybe a little bit background. When people came here and they were on the bases and they wanted to join family and friends, a lot of them wanted to go to places, obviously those 3 places. And we actually had to stop that from happening because we're already overwhelming those communities. And the lack of affordable housing was mentioned earlier, but it is severe in those 3 locations. And so we really had to redirect people. Not everybody listened, not everybody did that, which is fine. People obviously are free to go wherever they want, but because of that, a number of people have showed up in these locations and they really do need extra help. And the agencies there are unable to provide that. So I would say, those 3 areas in particular, highly impacted, heavy needs, and a lot of help is needed.
Yeah, Kathy, let me, I can jump in a little bit on this too, because this is what I alluded to. We were spending a lot of time in the cross-cultural class helping people understand that some of these places that you have your heart set on are going to be really, really hard. And that's what's happened. So that we're finding that Afghan refugees are staying in hotel rooms much longer than what anybody would want for their children, especially because there's not affordable housing. When you've got it, when people are going to take entry-level jobs, and not everybody's going to want their wife to work. That's another issue. But the amount of money that you are going to earn in an entry-level job in Northern Virginia or Sacramento or Austin, Texas, as Larry just said, is not, you're going to get a room or a house in a not very desirable part of the city. And the commitment has always been to get safe housing. Well, it's taking a long time. It's very hard and they need help. The resettlement agencies are drowning in those particular cities because there's so much work to be done and so many people that need all the assistance that they can get. So a shout out, Larry, to you for recognizing the challenges that our resettlement agencies are under. And if you can help in those 3 areas, all the better.
So my understanding is that all of the bases in the US, those 8 bases, have been closed now. Are there any Afghans left on bases either in the US or overseas?
Okay, I'm going to jump in again, Lee, sorry.
Good, no.
So the 8 bases are closed. They are officially closed to Afghans. They were all resettled by the mid to late February time period. What the administration did was, in order to continue to bring people in, not as refugees, and I have to tell you, a great policy decision was made, was to pivot to refugee resettlement and to pivot to special immigrant visa status so that people did not need to come in as parolees. Having said that, there is still a small kind of tail of people who are coming in as parolees. And so we did set up a site in Northern Virginia, which is a conference center, which is hosting or housing parolees who are still coming in smaller numbers, less than 2,000 at a time. And so that is the follow on to what used to be 8 bases. There is that one conference center. It is not a military installation. It is a far nicer facility. And then, but the impetus is to really bring in people with full refugee status. They have immigration benefits. It is the normal refugee program with all of that support, which is great. The only base overseas that we are still operating out of is the one in Qatar. That will continue to be open for some time. And that is now the platform from which people coming out of Afghanistan through US government support, which is now called a relocation and not an evacuation, they are being relocated from Kabul to Qatar, where we can process them as refugees or SIVs, and then bring them to the US directly to the community to which they're destined. So that's kind of the future of the program.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other questions? Does anybody else have a question? If you'll just unmute and ask it at this point.
I've posted a question primarily for Larry or Corey or whoever. I've been helping refugees, or I'm sorry, parolees, and that's an interesting term when we think of what parole means in our culture. So humanitarian parolees, I'll use it that way. are still waiting to find out what's the next step. And many of the people I've been meeting have solid cases for SIV, special immigration visas, but they're here and they don't know how to start. And their English is limited. They have documentation, but they don't have representation. So I've raised this issue as a question for Larry or Corey or anybody that knows as to how to get that representation. Catholic Charities is telling us that they'll have somebody in the month of May. These people need it now. They need to move to their SIV status as soon as possible. And that's a key issue along with everything else.
Larry, you want to take that
So
one?
I'll start. So a couple things. One, and I'll back up to something. So again, people came in as a parolee, not as a refugee, and we can't make them a refugee now that they're here. And
Got
so
it.
again, they can claim asylum, and we know our asylum system is rather backlogged, right? That shouldn't be a surprise to most people. And so that's a problem, although there is a process to be able to get through that. People who were SIV applicants who came in as a parolee, first of all, can't be an SIV because they don't need a visa anymore. They're here, right? So that's a little bit of a technical term there. There is an ability for them to adjust to special immigrant status, but it depends, I think, on how far along they were in the process. And
The problem I'm seeing is many, although qualified, never began the process.
Well,
they were guards for the embassy. They were
right. So they are the most, probably the most straightforward process for them is to basically claim asylum and go through the asylum process. And the way, and sorry to say it, this is one of the unfortunate consequences of the way we brought people in. I don't think there was another way to do it in this volume, but it came with certain ramifications, and this is one of those. But what I would say is that, you're talking to Catholic Charities, and they are one of the best in terms of legal representation. But any of the resettlement agencies that you can encounter at the local level should know where legal services are available in the community. Oftentimes they're pro bono. I'm not going to tell you it's fast or it's straightforward, but legal representation is important. It's not like you have to have a lawyer, but certainly getting counsel and figuring out the immigration system does require certainly more expertise than I personally have. So I would leave that to some people who have law degrees.
Terry, thank you for the question. Corey, you had a response?
Well, this is Terry, I wish I had a better answer. Larry explained it. It's very frustrating. It's huge.
Yes.
It's just hugely frustrating. But I want a bit of a spin-off answer. Snow leopards, Operation Snow Leopards. Operation Snow Leopards. We're going to put that, all of this is going to go on to Women of Peace Corps Legacy's website, and ideally send them to you directly if we're able to do that. But just know Women of Peace Corps Legacy is going to have all this for you. Operation Snow Leopard, I've learned a lot about them recently, and they are a group of vets and then a whole bunch of other civilians that were not military coming together, trying to get people out of Afghanistan who are stuck there. So if you are in the position of trying to move people from Afghanistan that are under threat, that are being threatened, maybe there are some of those SIVs who work for the embassy or were judges or worked in women's issues or whatever that thing is, that Operation Snow Leopard is working very, very, very hard to try to get people out. And they're about as good as I've been able to learn about or find. So that's just for those of you who are stuck with that awful situation too.
So Terry, thank you for the question, Corey and Larry, Kathy, Barbara, Shireen. I want to thank you all for making this happen tonight. I hope that people have learned what's going on, at least gotten started in terms of information and ways that you can reach out and be of assistance. As Corey has mentioned, we will do a one-pager as has been suggested and get this to you directly through your email addresses as you signed up for this, this program. And if we can't do that, we will have it posted on the Women of Peace Corps Legacy website. So what I would suggest, if you have found this program to be useful, rather than writing any of our 3 organizations, would you let NPCA know that? Just send them a note saying, this was useful. We need more of this kind of programming. Women of Peace Corps Legacy certainly aspires to having a similar conversation around the Ukrainian refugees as that progresses. So with that, I'm just going to suggest that people unmute and say goodbye to one another.
Okay, Lee, just real quickly, Lee, we've used the acronym NPCA a couple of times. It's National Peace Corps Association. We're an affiliate, one of 83 affiliates in PCA. And one thing about NPCA that we need to say is that Peace Corps Community for Refugees won the award out of 183 affiliates of being the most successful this past year. That is a huge deal. And so hats off to the Peace Corps Community for Refugees because of the really quite extraordinary recognition that they got. But NPCA, National Peace Corps Association, we are part of.
And I will just add that Friends of Afghanistan have also received the Lorette Rupe Award for Outstanding Community Service. So good on you. All right. Just unmute and say goodbye or wave to everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Bye. Salam.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, Corey.
Bye.